A video that went viral among, let's be honest, mostly conservatives, showed a black transgender stripper stripping at some public event, I believe in Seattle. Many people were shocked, wondering why the city would pay for a stripper to perform. Don't ask me, I don't know either. And now the woman in charge, apparently, the homeless agency director, quits. She's been forced out. The story from the Daily Mail. Seattle homeless agency director quits after coming under fire for inviting a drag queen to perform at annual conference where she stripped, twerked, and kissed attendees. Kira Zylstra, the acting director of King County's coordinating agency for homelessness in Washington, resigned over the weekend. This story to me is deeply offensive. You know why? Well, I did a segment the other day about the homeless crisis. I have repeatedly talked about the homeless crisis, and I used to actually work on charity issues for the homeless. I think some of these problems are very difficult and you might not be able to solve a lot of this, right? I see Bernie Sanders say, "Oh, we tax the billionaires, we can end homelessness." You can't. And I know this firsthand, all right? There are some people who just want to be homeless, especially in Seattle. And the best thing we can do is make sure they're safe, healthy, and comfortable. Make sure that their medical care, they in some ways being treated for. And I know a lot of people might say, like, why are we spending taxpayer dollars on that? Because I'll tell you this. What do you do when someone has a constitutional right to freely move about the country? You can't arrest somebody simply because they're standing on a public sidewalk too long. Even if they're sleeping, there's an arbitrary distinction between laying down, closing your eyes, or sitting up. It is a difficult problem to solve. My understanding is the Supreme Court has ruled you can't arrest somebody because they're laying in public. Now, these are people who likely aren't paying taxes, and it's costing us money. But it is a serious, serious challenge. How do you deal with protecting civil rights while also trying to keep something, safe and orderly? I don't know. But I will tell you this. California's got human waste problems. And if homeless people are in camps and diseases start emerging like typhus and bubonic plague, like, the fears what's happening in California, yeah, we got to do something. And that means if we're paying taxes, got to go to clean it up. I'd expect it to. Now, the real problem is they don't do that. See, I can sit here and say all day and night. I mean, they somewhat do, but they really, really don't. I can say all day and night, it'd be great if we spent our taxpayer dollars making sure the homeless weren't getting diseases, were healthy, so that the best we could do is limit the spread of diseases. You know what we get instead? We get this. Look, man, I got no beef with Beyonce Black St. James, the transgender performer. I got no beef. Yeah, do your thing, man. If she's putting on a show at private events, right on. It's America, man. You're free to do what you want to do. The way I always explain it is I don't care what you do so long as you're not hurting others. So in this case, I got nothing. I got respect for the hustle. You know what I mean? The problem is the government wasting money and not getting the job done. I lived in Seattle. Let me tell you something. They got a homeless youth problem. That's a fact. They got people who ride the rails, they jump out in Seattle, and they sleep on the streets. And the problem is a lot of these kids want to do it. This is a fact, okay? Because I've worked in this field, and I will tell you, there's a lot of young homeless people who don't want to be helped. They want to be left alone. They want to hang out with their friends. And yes, they sleep in the gutter, and you can't change their minds. You really, really can't. I know this firsthand. So there are things you can do. There's money that could be spent in positive ways. You can, make sure that they get proper health care, like I said, to a certain degree, right? I'm not, I think the challenge is sometimes the correct solution is you have to begrudgingly make it. Now, I've made this point before, look, and you guys know that I lean a little bit left on these issues. I think if we took the approach of kind of like leave them to their own devices, it's their own fault, yeah, things could get worse. It's not so easy as to say, teach a man to fish. Some people tell you to screw off no matter how much you try. So the best thing you can do is try and protect civil rights of the population and minimize the harm caused by like homeless camps and excessive, population expansion and things like that. I can't tell you what the solution is because as somebody who's liberty-minded, I think about there's a public sidewalk. The public owns it. We all pay for it, right? We all pitch in. If you're standing there, you're fine. If you're sitting down, you're fine. If you're blocking the road in any capacity, the cops can ask you to move. But like I said, I believe the Supreme Court has ruled there's no distinction. If you're on public property, they can't just kick you out just because you're there. So people can sleep there. It's a challenging issue. I'll tell you what the wrong thing is. The wrong thing is when the government uses taxpayer dollars to hire a performer to dance around and strip when, listen, man, we're strained for resources as it is. You can't be spending money on this stuff. If Beyonce Black St. James wants to put on a burlesque show, a strip show, a drag show at a private event, yeah, rad, awesome. By all means, go do it. I got a lot of friends, probably be down to go see that. But when the public is supposed to be using our taxpayer dollars to make sure they are protecting people, they are solving these problems, and this is what they spend money on, you know what, man? This is why I don't have a lot of faith in government. This is the biggest problem with government. I tell you this right now. The problem with government is that it can't fail. And most of you know this. I get it. Preaching to the choir. We're not socialists here, so even those of us who are like, yeah, I think a government program in this direction could make sense. I think you've got to be a sane, rational. I'll put it this way: there's no sane, rational lefties. There's like 10 of us. Okay. Here's my thing. I'm like, hey, it's actually a really good idea if we allocate some of the community funds, taxpayer funding, towards solving the problem of homelessness because it's a serious problem affecting our community. That's a fact. However, I also recognize that because these systems can't naturally fail like a business would, they tend to become bloated and corrupt. So how do you deal with this? Well, you know how we used to deal with it? Journalism. That's right. Somebody would highlight what was done and force something to change. That's a very, very difficult thing to do. Now, journalists can force major corporations to change if they expose malfeasance and all that stuff, and they still do. But boy, I tell you what, first, independent journalist Christopher Rufo, outspoken on the homelessness crisis in Seattle, shared the video. He was criticizing the agency. All right, I read that part, but listen, that's what it's all about. We wouldn't know that this woman, Kira Zylstra, or whoever, hired a drag performer to strip and was using taxpayer money for that without that journalist. That's why journalism is so important. And it's funny. The Trump, it's not so much the Trump supporters who are very much anti-fake news. I mean, they're the most outspoken for sure because Trump leads that charge. The reality is, man, we on the left have been screeching about this forever. I mean, look at Occupy Wall Street. I started live streaming. You had the Occupied Wall Street Journal. Dude, everybody knew the press was fake news. And it's only the establishment Democrats who are playing that game. And you know what's so messed up? I'll tell you this, man. I made a full segment defending Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks because the New York Times smeared him and other people have smeared him. You want to criticize Cenk for talking about that animal love comment? I think that's fair to criticize him over. I don't like the pulling out of context clips from the past and using that against someone because I don't know what he was actually talking about. Maybe he was quoting somebody else. Maybe he was saying, would it be stupid if someone said something like this? That's what they do. Like, what if I said something like, I had a friend who once came to me and said, I like chocolate ice cream. They take that one snippet where I said, I like chocolate ice cream, ascribe it to me. No. I'm not a fan of that. But I'll tell you what. You should have had these progressives from the get-go agreeing with Trump. And this is the craziest thing to me. Trump derangement syndrome is so thick and it's so viscous. It is basically a tangible object. That's how crazy it is. That when Bernie Sanders is lied about repeatedly, that when Andrew Yang is omitted from MSNBC in basically every single poll, when Tulsi Gabbard is lied about, and now Cenk Uygur is lied about, you'd think all of us could get together and say, the media is trash. You'd think so. Unfortunately, too many people hated Trump so much, they ignored the problem until it got worse, and now it's affecting them. So you know what I say? Listen, I'm ahead of the market on this one. That's why I talk about what I talk about. This is good journalism. It's kind of weird, I'll admit, like a dude noticing that they're spending taxpayer dollars on a transgender drag performer stripping in a public office or whatever, or public gala. I don't know what they were doing. I'm glad that they exist, though. I'm glad that there are people calling this out. So there's something interesting happening now, too. And we've got a big challenge here. One of the big benefits of social media is that these videos can go viral and we can hold these government, institutions accountable. It still is difficult to purge them, shut them down, and start over. That's the big challenge with government. I think you can do a government program right. And I think it is right to have programs. I mean, listen, we have corruption in the police departments and the fire departments. It's a fact, man. They exist. We need to deal with those problems. It is a serious challenge to figure out how to make sure that they are above board, functioning properly. But I'll tell you this, man, the fire department, it works. So the question I have, and I think a lot of my views may be due to the fact I grew up with a firefighter dad. And while there are certainly problems in the fire department, like, these are good dudes. You know what I mean? Like, they go out there, they risk their lives, they save lives. The fire departments work pretty well. They're not without their issues. But I looked at that and I'm like, how do we get that one right? You know what I mean? That's government doing something right. That's like all of us being like, hey, we need a fire department. So, how can we take that and somehow make sure that these institutions are doing the right thing? I don't know. And I'll tell you what, dude, I'm sure fire departments waste money too. I'm sure it's similar to a lot of government programs. I'm not a fan of certain institutions being left to the private sector, like police, for instance, because accountability is a serious issue. And I've had a lot of conversations with ANCAPs and libertarians about private police forces, and I'm kind of like, nah, I don't like the idea of, like, you know what it is? It really is tough, because if you have a private police force, the concerns are about whoever pays the most, and you could have, warring factions. But I know people say no because the economic incentives. Nah, man. The reason the police work in the United States is because it's by mandate interagency cooperation. They don't always do it, but this means it's all one system. It is complicated, though. I got a lot of respect for a lot of cops, man. That is a job I would never want to do. And a lot of people on the left don't seem to get this. When they all freak out, I'm somehow devolving into this thing about cops. But no, I want to say this. Man, I've had some bad encounters with bad cops. I've had drugs planted in my car. The only reason I got off is because my dad is a firefighter and they found his emblem and they cut me loose. They tried getting me on a marijuana charge. I'm like, I've smoked one time in my life when I was like 14, when they were like, try it, man. And then I was like, I don't enjoy this and I don't smoke. I never have since then. It was like one time I was like 14. And it's probably a similar story to many people, I guess. And I used to drink when I was a teenager, for about a year or two. And then I just completely stopped. And I'm totally, I just try to eat healthy and be healthy. But I had these cops try to pull this BS. I'll tell you what, man. I still get it. I don't single out the bad times because I've had good times. There was one instance, I'll try to keep the details vague for the sake of this individual's privacy. But this young dude I know, he did something wrong. And he panicked. And he ran away. And the cops showed up and they were like, we don't want you to ruin your life over this, man. We're going to talk with the victim. It was basically an accident. I don't want to say it was a hit and run, but it was basically this dude had an accident and the cops were like, just come back. We're gonna talk this one out. But the thing was, that was a smaller town. It was a small town. So the cops went to the person and said, we don't want to ruin this kid's life because he's stupid. We want to make sure he can make amends and do the right thing. And those cops were awesome. I've also been saved by some cops. But the fact remains, you've got people working in the police department who are dealing with, well, for one, crappy hours. But man, I could not imagine having to deal with some of these people I've encountered on the streets when I worked trying to solve homelessness. And then you get someone belligerent and they're spitting and they're dumping and you got to go out there and you're the one who's got to deal with that. No, I can understand that. But anyway. I digress. I guess the big takeaway from this video is, this woman's being forced to resign because journalists called her out. But shouldn't there be a complete overhaul and an audit of what they're spending money on? Because I'll tell you this right now. If a private business had a video like this emerge, like in the same vein, where they were doing ridiculous things or like wasting money, for one, a lot of people would be like, well, it's a private business. I don't care what they waste their money on. But if someone caught a business doing something that damaged their PR, people would stop spending money there. They would choose to say, we will not give you money, and that business would fail. And then in its wake, a new business would emerge, something different. If a restaurant produces, like let's say a video comes out of like a restaurant where they're like juggling rats in the kitchen and then letting them run around all over the food, nobody would shop there anymore. What happens when the government gets caught with rats in the kitchen? They say, we fired the person in the kitchen, everything's back to normal, carry on, and we're going to keep taking your money. You can't just stop paying that. So here's my, I guess when you're an adult, I'll say it again. We need some more adults on the left who can sit down and think about these problems, hear out the complaints of the right, and say, that's a good point. So I think what ends up happening is conservatives will look at something like this and be like, this proves why we shouldn't be relying on the government to do these things. And it's a fair point. It really is. Because when you cannot hold these people accountable, when the system, when the shop can't be closed or audited and then relaunched or even just let to go away, well, then it's going to become bloated and corrupt. So then I hear that. I hear those conservatives say, look at all the corruption in the welfare system. And I go, you're right. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of people exploiting the system. I think we need to overhaul this. I think you're right. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you're right. We need to audit. We need to shut it down. And then we need to figure out if and how we can reopen it. I believe these programs are important. I believe that the community coming together and saying we're going to have a government-run program to help the homeless is extremely important. I also believe charity plays a huge role in this as well, but I've worked for these nonprofits, and I also know they're driven by a revenue incentive. And I'm not exaggerating, man. I've worked for some of the biggest, some of the smallest nonprofits. And I'll tell you this, at the end of the day, the only thing they care about is that their numbers are up. It's a business. It's all the same. Now, there are some good small charities. I'm not trying to, drag everybody, but I worked in the nonprofit sector, man. And one of the reasons I got out was because I saw that all they cared about was at the end of the day, are their donors pumping in enough money? That was it. It was like, what are we doing to make sure the donors are coming in? And I'm like, man, look, I get it. You're doing good stuff. But the revenue incentive twisted the mission. And so in my experience, the bigger the nonprofit, the less they cared about the cause and the more they cared about convincing someone to donate. So I think there's good things charities can do, and I think it's got to be balanced between the two. And this goes for churches as well. I think it's funny when people say tax the churches, and I'm like, dude, they're basically nonprofits. They function very similarly to 501c4s. I don't think the argument of taxing churches makes sense. Now, if they're politicking, then yes, 501c4s can't do that either. But as far as I'm concerned, a church functions very similarly to a charity. Then yeah, you don't tax them. It's whatever. So here we have a story about a woman who's forced to resign. But I tell you what, it should go further than this. Look, man. The first thing I want to say too, because I know one of the biggest things the left is going to screech about is this woman, this trans, performer probably got paid a couple $100. It probably was not a big deal, and people are going to be like, it was a small event. It was entertainment. They hire entertainment all the time, and that's a good point. Listen, if this agency was going to be having a gala, for their employees, I think that's a fine and fair thing to do on the public's dollar. I absolutely do. Like, morale is an important point. Just because they work for the government doesn't mean they can't bring all their employees out for a nice dinner and talk about, just what they've done, what they plan on doing. And what if they hired a local musician? Nobody would care. So people are upset because this is, I guess, shocking to their sensibilities. But I still believe, well, no beef to Beyonce, Black St. James, do your thing, seem like you're pretty good at it. Seems like people are familiar with your work. I can respect that. I don't think this is what we should be spending our tax dollars on. And that would include hiring a local musician as well. So I can respect the idea that an agency is going to say, hey, we've got some money in the budget. We're going to go host a nice fancy dinner and hire some entertainment. And I still feel like I don't care what the entertainment is, man. I lean more towards if you're working in the public sector and if you're working for charities, these kind of expenses should be kept to a minimum. I really do think that. And I've seen how a lot of nonprofits, they function like businesses, and I think government shouldn't necessarily be doing that. Now again, you guys know I'm a milquetoast fence sitter. I'm not shocked and outraged by this as most people are. I see people saying like, "Oh my God, what are they doing? Debauchery." Well, first, I think it's fair to point out hiring a stripper is extremely different from hiring a local band to play music. That's a fair point. I know some people might argue entertainment's entertainment. That's you know what I mean? I'm not shocked and outraged. I'm not screeching and fanning myself and saying, oh my stars and garters or anything like that. I'm just kind of like, do better, man. The big problem I see from this is that they hired a stripper, and it's kind of like, is this really the culture we're trying to develop in helping the homeless and solving the problems facing our community? And I don't see this as being that part of the solution. I see unaccountable runaway programs, and there's no way to hold them accountable. But I'll tell you what, man, if the video was of a guy just like playing guitar and singing, nobody would have cared, right? So I would ask you this. Think about what at the root is different between the two. And I'm not saying there's no difference. I'm saying there is. And then let me know what you think in the comments about, based on the cultural presentation they describe, what really separates these forms of entertainment. In my opinion, I think it's fair to say there is a clear difference. But I'm not a staunch conservative. I am a liberal, and if you're familiar with the moral foundations, which you should definitely check out Jonathan Haidt's research, liberals tend to focus on the care and fairness moral foundations. Conservatives operate on all 5, potentially 6, which includes sanctity or purity. So this is a violation of sanctity. It's a debauchery. It's a stripper in a public setting being paid to do something outside of what is considered socially acceptable. That's why conservatives would be more likely to be shocked by this. Liberals won't care. Liberals only think, well, if they're entertaining and anyone else can entertain, that's fair, right? But my rating when I took the moral foundations test is not completely devoid of sanctity, and I understand the argument from conservatives. So I think that's where it's going to fall. But comment, you let me know what you think. I still personally fall on the side of, if we're going to be fair, we're going to be fair to the liberals and the conservatives. And if conservatives are being forced to pay for this through taxpayer dollars and they're upset, we got to reassess, because that wouldn't be fair to conservatives to tell them this is how we spend your money. It is a challenge to solve all of these problems. But the biggest challenge of all is how we maintain government programs, which, yes, I believe are important, when they become bloated, corrupt, or act against the will of their, the people who are funding it. But I'll leave it there. It was a long video, I guess. But stick around. Next video is coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all then.